you know, and tell people who you are, Richard. I actually have a bio from when you visited our former state senator, Jen Metzger, at an event. So hopefully it's still relevant.
I've done a couple of things since then, but it's all good. And
Awesome.
Jen can always tell you the gossip later too.
All right. Okay, cool. So I'm also going to, I guess, click mute all, but give, and then I'm going to ask you to unmute, Richard.
Okay.
Okay, I think that worked. Awesome. So I'm just going to quickly double check that I didn't get any other just quick last minute ones because they just kept coming in. And I didn't even click send that last one. Let's just do that before we get going, if you don't mind. All right. And awesome. I'm going to mute myself on that. Okay. Oh, good to see Susanna hopped on too. Awesome. So we'll give it to like about 6:03 if everyone doesn't mind. Just because I forgot to hit send on one of the people I sent the link to until this very moment. And then we'll get started. I'll kick things off and then, you know, turn over to Richard from Pulp, who will tell us all about the rights we need to know in terms of public utilities. And then we'll have time for questions and answers. I had some questions that came up the past few months from Landlord-Tenant Relations Council things, but they might get actually addressed in the presentation. So on that end, I hope everyone, you know, that is tuning in gets out a pen and paper or, you know, your phone or whatever it is you use to take notes and stuff. Because as, you know, as he goes through things, you might have a question and you want to not forget it. So you can ask in the end. All right, it's 6:03. So let's get started. For those who are on the Zoom, just so you know, we're going to keep everyone except for who is presenting or later at the end actually asking a question muted until, you know, you need to be unmuted. So thanks for your patience on that. For those who are tuning in on YouTube or after the fact in the future, welcome. This is Village of New Paltz plus our Village Landlord-Tenant Relations Council, collaborating with PULP, which is New York's public utility law project on public utility, know your public utility rights training. And so we are joined today by Richard Berkeley, Esquire, Executive Director from the Public Utility Law Project, which we lovingly call PULP. He's joining us here tonight, who's going to speak about, you know, our rights as utility consumers. Let me see. Before assuming his position in Pulp in 2015, Richard was Chief of Staff and Counsel to Senator Kevin Parker of the New York State Senate. Big fan right here. And before that, he was Director of the Senate Committee on Energy and Telecommunications, and has also worked with other legislatures and critical organizations, such as the State Office of Children and Family Services and the City of New York. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Richard. And I'm going to mute KT once she's on. Awesome. Richard, do I need to allow you to unmute yourself? Nope, you're good.
I think you remuted me, but don't worry.
Okay, sorry about that.
I will share my screen and then I will get started.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, this is going to take me a second, sorry. I just everything to my computer. So it's asking me to give it the permission. All right, I'm gonna have to log out and be right back. Actually, no, maybe not.
No worries. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help.
Okay. Let's see. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So in that case, hi everybody. My name is Richard Berkeley. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Utility Law Project of New York. We are actually 40 years old this year, and we are a public interest, not-for-profit law firm. We are the only independent entity in the state of New York that works on behalf of low-income and fixed-income utility consumers. And we've been doing that since the end of the 1970s. So tonight we're going to talk about your utility rights as a consumer, and we're going to talk about it in terms of COVID-19, because that's changed a lot of the law. So this slide, we have our website, utilityproject.org. We have a Facebook page and Twitter, both of which are Utility Project. And then we have up there our main email address and our hotline. It's a statewide toll-free hotline, and we are free, that is without charge, for any low-income or fixed-income New Yorker who has utility problems. So give a call to our hotline, send us an email too if it's an emergency, and someone will get back to you from my staff as quickly as we can. So the first question is, what is a public utility? So a public utility is a publicly or privately owned entity that provides residential and business customers with vital public services such as electricity, gas, telecommunications, and water. And for the town, as you know, it's also something that occupies the public rights of way. So it's under your streets, it's on telephone poles that are alongside roads and alongside sidewalks. So things have changed greatly in New York in the world of public utilities because of COVID-19. So the first thing is, back in March of 2020, the governor issued Executive Order 202, which created something called New York on Pause. And what that did is, as you all know, it caused all businesses to shut down. 100% of people moved off site, and then eventually we got back up to 90% and stayed there for a fairly long period of time. What that meant was that for those people who were still employed and were not immediately furloughed or on unemployment, the utility use that your employer used to pay, because you were in the office all day long, and so you turned down your heat at home. And I grew up in Ulster County, up in Woodstock, and so I know what turning down the heat during the day is like. But you used to turn your heat down during the day or turn your air conditioning down, and all your electric would be off or very low because you'd be in the workplace. They'd be paying for heat, they'd be paying for air conditioning. And so suddenly 100% of the energy use your employer used to pay is on your bill. And just to give you an example, my heating bill so far this winter is more than a third higher than it was last year at the same time. I don't use much air conditioning, but for most people around the state, the air conditioning bills are a lot higher. So generally, your bills are a lot higher than they were in 2019. And we have some on the slide deck that I'm going to give to the town. There are also some links to stories in USA Today. So as of November 2020, Ulster County's unemployment rate was 5%, and the rate for the county was 3% in the same month, November of 2019. And November of 2019 actually was the month where we had the most recovery from the Great Recession. So the greatest number of people had finally recovered from the Great Recession of 2008 through 2010, just 2 months before COVID knocked our economy on its butt again. Just to give you an example, Kingston's unemployment was 11% in May, and the surrounding counties around Ulster County were also triple the rates that they were in 2020 during the summer and into the early fall. So we're at a period now where people have been going back to work as things have opened up somewhat, and cross fingers, we won't be closing down again. So, I'm sorry, I kicked ahead. So now I'm going to talk about energy utilities, and that's primarily electric and gas. So on June 17, 2020, the Parker-Moseley moratorium law was passed by both houses of the state legislature and signed into law by Governor Cuomo's chapters 108 and 126 of 2020. The Parker-Moseley Act prevents water, telephone, gas, and electric utilities, both private and municipal, from terminating service to residential customers during the pandemic due to non-payment. And it also includes consumer protections that clearly define a customer's right to enter into or restructure a deferred payment agreement. And I'll come back to this later because it's really important. So it defines a customer's right to enter into or restructure a deferred payment agreement on their arrears from previously unregulated utilities. For example, 90% of the water systems in the state of New York were not regulated by the state. And it's also irrespective of any previous inability to complete a deferred payment agreement, what it says debarment here. The moratorium will end either after the state of emergency is lifted, which is currently January 29, but as a practical matter, it's fairly clear, and I'll get back to this in a second, that the governor will continue to extend it month after month until the end of March, and I'll explain later. Or the original law said it either lasts until the end of the state of emergency or until March 31, 2021, whichever comes sooner. The reason for the March 31, 2021 date was that's the day before the new budget begins for the state of New York. And the moratorium law was very specifically tied to the budget because it was obvious that the state's finances were going to crumble, as were all of the residents. And so tying it to the budget means it was more likely for people to get assistance in the budget. Now, just to give you an alert, most utilities around the state are still sending termination notices, even though they cannot lawfully turn you off. Others, like National Grid, are sending alert letters when you fall behind on your bills, and you can use those to apply for the Home Energy Assistance Program, otherwise known as HEAP, and I'll talk about that in a little bit also. So the Parker-Moseley law also created something that we call the safe harbor period. And I'm going to talk for a moment about how you get those protections. So you can be protected for 180 days after the end of the moratorium law's coverage. And there is a way that you protect yourself. And as we say here, you have to self-certify to the utility that you or your family has experienced a change in financial circumstances due to the pandemic. The Department of Public Service, which is the state regulator of utilities, has ordered the utilities to look for changes of financial circumstances. And there was a negotiation that came out with the fact that self-certification by the customer is sufficient. So everybody on the phone or on Zoom or on YouTube right now, if you want to take advantage of the safe harbor and not have a collection or a shutoff brought against you before the end of the moratorium and the safe harbor period, contact your utility, and we suggest that you call them and write them and tell them that you want to self-certify that you or your family has experienced a change in financial circumstances due to the virus. So the utilities, there are 9 of our major utilities. They all interpret this slightly differently. It could be increased daycare costs. It could be furlough. It could be loss of your job. It could be loss of your, significant other's job. It could be a whole bunch of things. If you're going to close your existing account and open a new one, that is, if you have to move, and there are many people who moved from New York City up into Central Hudson's territory during the pandemic, you'll need to contact the company again and recertify. The protections that you had at your old address don't automatically carry over. And I want to underline something really important. Your debt does not go away. But the reason for the 6-month safe harbor period is because the legislature and the governor understood that even if the public health and the economic crisis ends, you're not going to immediately have a job the next day. It's going to take you time to build back up your resources because you will have spent everything that you have if you've been on furlough or if numerous members of your family have been unemployed throughout the entire pandemic. So the safe harbor period gives you a time period to get work or seek financial assistance. And this is something we underline strongly. Work on a payment agreement with your utility company and pay what you can afford to pay. And I stress afford to pay, and I'll come back to that. Don't overpay, because that might get you back in trouble, but pay what you're able to afford, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. So the way to prevent termination after the end of the moratorium, first thing is that constituents, consumers, call the utility and self-certify that you've experienced financial changes due to COVID-19. If you are, an elected official on the phone, or you work for a advocacy group or public interest law firm, encourage the consumer or client to pay what they can afford when they can afford it. Another thing to look for is, does someone in your house have a serious medical condition or use life-sustaining equipment? I'll come back to those in a moment, but people with serious medical conditions, even in normal times, get additional time before the company can lawfully terminate service. Life-sustaining equipment, which is equipment that if the electric is turned off, they would die, they cannot be shut off. Company can still go after them for the bills, but they can't be shut off. Another thing to ask, if you're an elected official or a constituent relations person or advocate or a public interest law firm, has the customer or the client talking to you sought financial assistance to deal with the arrears, either through their county Department of Social Services, and that's how you get HEAP, the Home Energy Assistance Program. You can also get funds from churches, affinity groups, or from charitable organizations, and even the utilities, depending on which ones, have some charitable giving that they can do that can help with your back arrears. Another thing that's extremely important is that the law guarantees that a customer can't be shut off unless they are offered first an affordable deferred payment agreement. That's true still during the moratorium, but it's been true since 1981 in New York, and most of the rest of the country models themselves after our utility consumer protection rules. And last, if you believe that the utility is trying to shut you off unlawfully, or you're having a dispute with them about the size of your bill or some other thing, then file a complaint with the Department of Public Service, and I'll give you some information about that shortly. If you are low income or low fixed income, then you can also reach out to us on our hotline, and we'll help out, again, for free, because that is what we get paid to do. So here are some of the financial assistance programs that can help you pay your bills. The Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which we call HEAP in New York, is federally funded. The normal HEAP window opened up on November 2nd of last year, the beginning of winter. Emergency HEAP just opened up on January 4th. Apply through mybenefits.ny.gov. It's a terrific website, and this can be anywhere from between around $300 for the average person heating with a utility. If you get fuel oil or propane, it can be as much as $600 to help you pay your bills throughout the winter. There's also something called Emergency HEAP, and as I said, that just opened up January 4th, and that is if you get in additional difficulties after you've gotten your first grant of HEAP. In very cold or very difficult years, we can get multiple rounds of emergency HEAP. Last year we had 4. So you may get as much as $1,000 or $1,200 to help you pay your heating bills if you're income eligible and if you're having problems. There's also something called Renter's HEAP, and that applies really for people whose lease includes the landlord paying HEAP. So in theory, a little bit of your rent goes to paying the landlord's heating bill for you. What that means is that Renter's HEAP is very small. It ranges from about $25 to $40 for an entire heating season. And that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but one of the important things about Renter's HEAP is it makes you automatically eligible for other kinds of safety net benefits. And so we always suggest apply for Renter's HEAP if that's the only thing you can apply for. There's another reason also, and I'll get to that in a second. There's also, again, through the Departments of Social Services, called Heating Equipment Clean and Tune and Heating Equipment Repair and Replace. So state policy is that if you're low income and you can't afford to clean and keep your furnace in good repair, it pollutes more and it's more expensive. Therefore, it makes sense to invest a little bit of money up front in trying to keep it running perfectly when winter comes along. Same thing with repair and replace. If you're a low income household and your furnace breaks, you can go to your Department of Social Services and apply for a grant, not a loan, a grant, to replace it entirely. And we had someone down in New York City who replaced a $10,000 furnace. And usually they're much cheaper upstate. We mostly have gas furnaces, or we have some kind of a furnace that's run on propane or oil. Those are relatively inexpensive. And this is a really terrific program, and it usually doesn't run out of money. Now, Central Hudson, like all the other major utilities, also has something called the Monthly Low Income Discount Program. This is a statewide program that you become eligible to receive benefits from by receiving Home Energy Assistance Program monies. So the eligibility to get into it is receive HEAP, and that's why Renter's HEAP is important. Even if you get $37 from Renter's HEAP, the discount on a monthly basis can be as little as $19 and as much as $40 or $50 a month, depending on the utility and how high your bills are and what level of need you have. So the low income discount program, the first question we ask people when they call us, have you applied for HEAP, yes or no? If they haven't, we say apply now, see if you can get it, again, income eligibility. And once you get that, you automatically become entered into the low income discount program. And that can make a really big difference with your bills. There are also programs that are funded by the executives of the utility, like the Good Neighbor Fund at Central Hudson. It's also called Heart Share down in New York City. The Departments of Social Services also have something called Emergency Energy Assistance. That's a little complicated, but just know that there's another resource out there. And then, as I said in the beginning, if you are a member of a faith community, religious institutions frequently have utility funds for the winter. Not-for-profits do. There are also, as I said, utility-funded charitable programs, the Salvation Army, and there are loads of other things. But generally, if you are in need and you approach the Department of Social Services and talk to the utility, we always stress, talk to the utility, because they know about all this stuff and they will help you find the money if they can, because they want to get paid. So something that we all found out last week in the State of the State and yesterday in the state budget, Governor Cuomo has proposed an extension of the utility moratorium for regions that are under a state of emergency. So this is a much broader extension than is in the current Parker-Moseley law. Also, this new legislation would not only apply to electric, gas, and water, and to telephone, but it would also add cable television and internet service providers. So that's a really significant extension of the existing law. But, you know, I've looked at it and I thought about it, and to be honest, I worked for the city of New York during Superstorm Sandy, and there were a lot of people who were still being billed even though they hadn't been in their house for a long time and they couldn't shut off their gas service. And in the case of 9/11, there were a lot of people who were evacuated from lower Manhattan for 6 months, and they still were receiving bills from the utilities, and we had to fight those all individually, one by one. So having a moratorium on disconnections and accrual of fees and fines based on a state of emergency is actually very sensible, and I'm sure that it will become a better bill throughout the legislative process. Senator Parker, who is the author of the original Parker-Moseley moratorium, has also passed new legislation on Tuesday that would extend the moratorium until June, the end of June of 2022. My guess is that there will be a negotiation between the senator and the governor and the assembly over what will happen with this. So keep an eye on it, and we will too, and we'll tell you what happens. Now, there's also federal money for water arrears. The COVID-19 relief bill that was passed on December 27 of 2021 allocated $638 million nationally to be put into block grants to give to each state to help people pay down their water arrears. Now, we don't have any way of knowing how much arrears there is in water in New York because, unlike the energy utilities, the water utilities don't report on those numbers. And they will after this year because the legislature is going to pass some new laws to require reporting on that stuff, because the fact that the energy utilities report on it means it's possible to conduct evidence-based policy with them. The fact that telephone and water and internet and TV don't report that means it's very hard to deal with the problems that their customers might have. We don't know how much we'll get of this $638 million. I'm hoping that we get the same 10% of the national money that we get of home energy assistance money. So each year, home energy assistance money is about $3.5 billion. we get around $325 to $330 million a year. If we get 10% of the national money, we'll get 63 million. That should be enough to help a lot of people with their arrears on their water bills. And we'll know more about this when OTDA puts the program together. And we'll keep an eye on it. And again, we'll report back to all of you all. So one of the things that's going on now, and I want to brush on it quickly, is that Central Hudson has filed what's called a major rate case. They have come before the Public Service Commission, and they're asking to increase their rates. They've asked for an increase of 9.39% in their electric delivery rates and 6.22% in their gas delivery rates. Now, their press release, if you saw it, said that the number was much smaller, 4.25% for electric and 3.5% for gas. But that was by applying unreturned ratepayer funds to lower the amount of the increases. We call this moderation in the utility regulation business. So Central Hudson is going to ask for an increase of revenue for between 19 and $48 million. Their filing suggests that the rate increases are necessary for modernization of their infrastructure, repairs, vegetation management, which goes to reliability and resiliency, because most blackouts in the Central Hudson area are caused by trees falling on wires. It'll also fund workforce development, and there's this really terrific gas safety training facility that they're building. And it will also expand funding for the company's low-income program. And in fact, the company has proposed expanding the eligibility criteria to not only include receipt of HEAP, but because we're in a very specially challenging financial time, the company has proposed potentially adding food stamps, now called SNAP, TANF, and the federal school lunch program. We suggest that if you have any comments that you want to make either in favor of the increase or against the increase, that you can submit comments by emailing them to the secretary at the Public Service Commission at addresses on the slide, or call the 800 number. But we suggest that everybody, get involved in the case, because this matters. The ability to have electric and gas is the ability to conduct business and to live comfortably in your home. So it's vitally important in your area. We're involved in the case, as always, representing the interests of low and fixed income New Yorkers. AARP will be joining us. The State of New York Utility Intervention Unit is in, and then there are a number of corporate folks in. Bard College, Citizens for Local Power, a bunch of local groups also in the Central Hudson Valley are in too. So if you're involved with any groups, ask them if they're in. If they're not, have them join. I'm going to talk about telecommunications for a little bit now. So during COVID-19, except for landline telephone, old-fashioned telephone, and I'm sure there are a couple of people on this training that are old enough to remember when phones used to be connected to the wall. But those were protected by the moratorium. Essentially nothing else was. So internet, cable telephone, with the exception of Spectrum, are not covered by the moratorium. They could shut you off whenever they want, and they've done a lot of that in the Hudson Valley. Cable television can be shut off for non-payment. Cell phone service can be shut off for non-payment at any time they want. The Federal Communications Commission asked the industry voluntarily to protect customers against moratoriums, but only from March until June. And that really didn't help that much in New York. Now, Altice, which you may be more familiar with, is called Optimum in the Hudson Valley. Spectrum and Verizon have recently announced that they're going to be going back and restarting and reforming their low-income internet packages. For example, both Optimum and Spectrum have been required since 2016 to provide a low-income discount product for $14.99 a month. But the problem with those is that they put on eligibility barriers that excluded most people that wanted the service. So if you had internet from them or anyone else within 60 days, you couldn't get it. If you owed them any money, you couldn't get it. My argument would be if you owe them money, it's a suggestion you need a lower bill. But with the governor's new legislation, it will apply to these important services. After all, if your children need to go to school when it's closed, they have to go by internet. And there are many, 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 many tens of thousands of New Yorkers who don't have internet and teachers that don't have internet. It'll also be some debt forgiveness and expansion of deferred payment agreements as we move forward, both with the suggestions by the three companies here, but also through federal activity and state activity. So in his budget, the governor announced that all providers of internet services in New York would be required to offer a $15 a month affordable service to low-income households. And that's important. I think it's huge. Just to give you an example, and I know the numbers in New York City more because they're appalling, there are more than 50,000 children in New York City who are in homeless shelters who have no internet and are being held as being truant from being in school because they can't attend. And in many parts of the state, and not even, I mean, for example, in the city of Albany, the capital, you go 8 miles out of town in one direction, people are on dial-up. You go out a little further and they got nothing. So it's not as if it's only in the Tug Hill Plateau or, far to the west of Middletown or, on the other side of the Cannondale Reservoir that you don't have internet. So part of the goal that the governor is announcing this for is to make sure to close the homework gap. There's also a federal fund, it's $3.2 billion, and we are involved in that proceeding at the FCC to come up with a hardship fund to pay for internet subscriptions for families with children who qualify for school lunch and they can't afford $15 a month. The governor is also requiring a broadband disclosure. So from now on, instead of having surprise charges on your bills, all the bills will explain what the charges are, why you're being given with them, and no surprises. So this is going to be a big change in New York. I should point out, by the way, that the affordable internet is also important for seniors who, even if many of us will be able to safely, after vaccination, go back out and enter into the public, most seniors are probably going to have to wait another year to be careful. And that means all the doctors are going to have to consult with them by telemedicine. Many seniors can't afford broadband. So now the problems with landline phone generally in New York, even before the pandemic, were that the copper wires that bring the service to your house are old. Many of them were put in the 1970s or earlier. I mean, the telephone network in the United States goes back to the end of the 19th century. And quite honestly, large phone companies don't want to repair them. They would rather move you over the fiber optic or tell you get a cell phone. So if you lose landline service, complain to the company, then file a complaint with the Department of Public Service. Again, if you're low fixed income, give us a call on our hotline and we'll try and help you out. If you're having a billing problem with a landline telephone company, complain to the company again, file a complaint with the Department of Public Service. If you are having a problem with long distance and you actually have a long distance company or a long distance plan, and I know that there are a whole bunch of Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z who are like, what's all that stuff? There's still people that have separate long distance companies, and they're not regulated by the state. They're only regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. Or if you've been swindled, and that's possible, particularly if you're using calling cards and you're calling internationally, the Attorney General of the state of New York can help you out. So other types of common problems with telecommunications are associated with internet service providers and cable companies. And quite honestly, billing and service quality concerns are pretty much only handled by the FCC and New York's Attorney General. Congress took away pretty much all of the municipal ability to regulate cable companies and internet service providers. And I should point out, it's very likely that the Biden administration will reverse that. But Congress and then the administration that just left office today took away your ability to regulate at a local or at a state level. Cell phone problems with billing and service quality are also not handled by the state of New York or by municipalities. Again, you have to go to the Federal Communications Commission or the New York State Attorney General. Back in 1998, the cell phone companies convinced the state legislature that if they were not regulated, that cell phone service would get cheaper. And it's up to you to decide whether that happened or not. With regard to cable television, when I started my career doing utilities in New York, I was the cable attorney for the city of New York. I used to be able to order them to charge what we thought was reasonable. You can't do that anymore. Congress took that away. So the size of your bills, problems of billing, service quality concerns of cable, all have to be done by the FCC. And to some extent, service quality concerns, not billing necessarily, and certainly not the amount of the bills, can be helped out by the New York State Public Service Commission. And if you ever looked at your cable bill and turned over the back, you'll see that there's a number that usually goes to the town or city attorney. And I was that person who had their phone number on the back of the bill in New York City. And let me tell you, that was no fun. As far as satellite, obviously there are many parts of the state that use satellite. And in fact, most of Adirondack Park and the Tug Hill Plateau receive their internet through satellite. That's entirely handled by the FCC, and the New York State Attorney General can get involved if they're just flat out swindling you. There are also these things called internet or voice over internet protocol telephones. You may have heard of UMA or Vonage or Magic Jack. They used to have this really cool ad on TV. And actually most cable phone services are regulated by the FCC. And again, if there's some form of deception or unfair business practices, the New York State Attorney General can get involved. Here's the contact information for filing complaints. Up at the top, we have the phone number for the consumer complaint line at the AG. They also have a very good online complaint. The Federal Communications Commission, I may have been angry at them for the last 4 years because I think that they did a lot of anti-consumer things. But the folks there are hardworking and they really do actually care about helping consumers. Unfortunately, the people that they work for do not. And then finally, there's the complaint line for the Public Service Commission. The complaint line is right here. It's open essentially 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And what we suggest is if you call to give a complaint, also follow up in writing and make a note in the writing through this link that we have on the screen that you called already. Make sure, by the way, when you file a complaint that you get a complaint number so that you know that they're tracking it. All right, that brings us to the end. So here is all of our contact information. You have our hardwired, or what they call snail mail. We have all of our internet and social media connections, our statewide hotline, again, 877-669-2572. And that's all I'm going to present on Know Your Rights right now. And let me pop back out and unshare my screen if I can find that. Okay. All right, I'm back. And if anyone has any questions, let's go for it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard. That was really, really helpful. I was taking photos on my Instagram, even though I know we're going to have the presentation and this is going to live on
and you
our
know how
website.
To call us. I mean, just reach out to us. The reason we exist is to help, low income and fixed income individuals, to help the municipalities, elected officials. Like, that's what we do.
It's awesome. You guys are great. Thank you. Yeah. So did anyone who is on the Zoom have any questions? And if so, I think you can ask to unmute. I think you should be able to unmute yourself though.
Yeah. If you don't know how to unmute locally, there's a little happy face at the bottom of the screen that says reactions. And one of the things you can do is click on it and raise your hand. And then Alex will see it and will be able to unmute you. I don't know, do you have any way for the folks who are watching this on YouTube to contact you and ask questions?
Yeah. I mean, if anyone writes in the chat on the YouTube, we'll see it. And then if anyone, quickly contacts me in any of the way, in any of the many ways, how I've been kind of monitoring my email and social media and the form this whole time. Okay. So there's a couple options here. Did anyone need me to help you unmute?
They're all just looking like they're taking it in.
I know, it's a lot. Definitely. And I feel like you kind of covered the question that I had, that, has come up a few times is like, the renters HEAP, and, what the point of that is, because it's like when you're in that emergency mode, the small amount of, assistance that it is kind of like, is this worth it? But now I understand exactly how to communicate, like, no, go ahead and like do this. This is why you need to do this, because you can get all this other assistance.
Let me expand on that too, because
Yeah, that'd be
renters
great.
may be a teeny tiny little bit of money. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, gee, that doesn't help at all. It's 1/10 of what you get if you have service from the utility. But first, it makes you automatically cross-eligible for something called Lifeline Telephone. So there's a federal program that makes regular telephone service $9 a month for low-income households. And so if you get Renters HEAP, you automatically get Lifeline Telephone without having to do any paperwork at all. You're just automatically eligible. So that's one thing. The second thing is, again, it gets you into the low-income discount program that utilities have. And that can be a really tremendous difference in your bills. When we did the Niagara Mohawk case back in 2017, the highest discount that you could get if you were a family with seniors and young kids in the house, you could get up to a 50% discount on your bill. In the last Central Hudson case, I didn't look at the number, but it was more than 30% discount if you got the low income discount. And I'm guessing, I haven't done the numbers yet because we're still early in the Central Hudson rate case. We just handed in our testimony, our expert testimony, about 3.5 weeks ago. Our second set of testimony is due on Friday, which is why some of the people, normally you might have had some of my other staff coming along, but they're off working on it. But I would suspect it's somewhere between 20 and 40% of a discount on your energy bill in this case, depending upon how great your need is. So it's always worth getting the Renters HEAP, even if it's only $37 or whatever. Did you have any other questions you wanted to ask?
Thank you for that. The only other thing that's come up a bit on Landlord Tenant Relations Council, which is like a Village of New Paltz council that consists of landlords, tenants, and a neutral party, and has been so clutch, especially during the pandemic. Is just this basic 101 thing about what happens with your electric, if you're renting, or if you're a landlord, or whatever the case may be, how it's supposed to be split up. That's come up a couple of times, and I know it's kind of 101. I just totally worded the question weird, but
no, I think I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
So let me try and take it piece by piece. The first thing is we have this really strangely named law in New York, and there's something similar in other states, but in New York we call it the shared meter law. So the law says, and this is back from the 1930s, that a customer is only responsible for the energy bills that are in parts of the structure that are entirely within their control. This tends not to happen in big apartment or new apartment buildings. It tends to happen in what are formerly owner-occupied or small multifamily dwellings. And so usually the landlord has lived in there. And so they at some point, it was either a mother-daughter, or a mother-in-law kind of thing. And so they paid all the bills. But when the landlord moves out and then the tenant moves into an apartment that has either the common areas or maybe the furnace and stuff like that on it, that's illegal. And so what you do then is you call up the utility company. They have a duty under state law to come and investigate. So they come and they actually come to your house. They test all of the meters. They test all of the light sockets and electric plugs. And they find out how much of it that you may be paying for as a tenant that you shouldn't be. And then they do a bunch of math back at their headquarters. Like I say, they go back to the business and the magic happens. And then they tell the landlord, you have a shared meter problem, and at that point, the landlord has 3 things they can do. The first is that if the cost of fixing it is not excessive, and there's like a whole legal test for it, they have to fix the wiring. If it is too expensive, they have 2 options. One of them is just to take it into their name, like to put the bill in their name. Most landlords don't want to do that for obvious reasons. But while it's easy to think of this as being something that happens on purpose. Quite often it's an accident. You buy an old building. This law didn't exist before the late 1920s. So you sometimes buy an old building where it just makes sense that the ground floor apartment has like the back door light on it or the light over the washing machine, but you might rent that to someone else later and you didn't know it. So, you can find that out the hard way, and then either you can put the bill in your name or you can come to an amendment of your lease that allocates a small shared meter fee to your tenant. And there's like a whole bunch of legal things to examine. But the first step is for the tenant to talk to the utility. The other kind of way that bills might be going in the wrong directions by accident is that quite frequently owner-occupied, the owners do their own electric work, even if it's not code. And so if you buy an old house, like I did, a zillion years ago, the first thing you should do is when you do your house inspection, when you're buying, have your engineer, the guy who's doing the inspection for you, take a look and see if all the work was done to code. And then there's some very simple equipment you can get to trace all the wires. It's basically a little thing you stick in the socket. It makes a buzzing noise. And then you can hear it when it comes through the electric panel. And you can find out if things are wired improperly. Does that answer your question, I think?
Yeah, actually, thank you so much.
And by the way, the utilities are extremely happy to help fix these things because they get the blame for it. And it's not their fault. And they're very good at untangling this. They'll come in as quickly as they can. There's actually I think it's 120 days that they have to examine this and then come out with an answer telling the landlord what they have to do. If the landlord doesn't fix it, and generally most of them do it unless they're bad guys, the Public Service Commission can order outcomes. And so we've had people get thousands of dollars of refunds because of shared meter.
Hi, it's Margot here. I had a question about the moratorium. What was the ending date of the new extension on the moratorium?
That's a really good question, Marco. Thank you for asking it. So the original Parker-Moseley moratorium ended on March 31st of 2021. It was signed into law in June of 2020. But it was because it was uncertain how long the state of emergency would last, because no one really, who would have thought that the federal government would screw up the pandemic this bad? Like, it didn't make sense that it wouldn't be fixed in a couple of months, like it has always been in the past. So it was either the end of the state of emergency or March 31. The governor's new moratorium language that he has in the budget will be negotiated, but right now it essentially ends when the state of emergency ends. So if we got into a pandemic, or I don't know, I tend to use extreme examples because you remember them. So one of the things I tell my staff, because they were all really freaked out in the beginning of the pandemic for obvious reasons, I said, the reason that you're all scared is not just because of the pandemic. And most younger folks didn't live in an age when people got diseases and died. Like, all that stuff was gone by the end of the 70s or the 80s. So like, you're not used to kids dying from polio or whatever, like that went away. So my staff are mostly young, and I said to them, look, this is the beginning of every zombie massacre movie ever filmed. So there's always some strange flu or something like that. And then an untested vaccine is used, and the next thing you know, there's zombies. So basically, the governor's language in his budget now says until the end of the state of emergency. So it could go on forever if we had an emergency, either at a global level, and I think he was very smart to do this, or at a national level or at a state level. If we have something that goes on forever, then the moratorium will go on forever. The likelihood of that is pretty low. Like, I honestly, I thought the public health side of this emergency would last a long time, but I thought we'd get the economic thing together faster. But the economic problem is partially the furloughs of what's called the entertainment industry, but it's also partially the lack of reliable, affordable broadband around the state. So there are a lot of people who simply can't work from home. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Stay in touch with Alex and with the with the village, because it is entirely possible that the language will change and there'll be an end date solid. My guess is that it won't end, no matter what happens, it won't end before mid-2022 or the end of 22. But as it is now, it could go on as long as the governor and the legislature believe that there is a state of emergency that's harming the financial health of the state of New York.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
Yeah, that was a good question, Margot. Do you have a couple more?
I do have one more.
Yeah,
Go
go
for
for
it.
it.
I don't want to, if somebody wants to go before me, I can wait for sure.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease in New York.
Yeah, go for it, Margot.
All right. The electric increase of 9%, Central Hudson going up with electric and gas, is that a proposal or is that an actual? And when would that happen actually?
So it's a proposal, and if it were to be accepted, and I use that linguistic formulation because it won't be, there'll be negotiations over it, and we're pushing back on it. But it would occur at, I'm trying to remember, I think it's July 1st of next year. So
Next year.
a rate
2020.
case usually takes an entire year, and that's in the statute. It takes 11 months. But when we settle, and most cases in New York settle, and there are a bunch of reasons for that. It's cheaper because remember that the utility is fighting its side of the rate case with your money. So it's better if it's cheaper in that respect because it's odd to be paying to have your own rates raised. But also groups like Center for Local Power, Alliance for a Green Economy, a lot of other environmental groups, and PULP, we ask for things that are essentially social policies. So when I file a rate case, and I'll give you an example in the Niagara Mohawk case that's going on simultaneously, we found out that the company's service territories has a much larger number of seniors and the disabled than they did 3 years ago in the last rate case. And all utilities have a legal duty to give additional protections to seniors and to the disabled. And so they're required to track those numbers and to apply those protections. We found in Niagara Mohawk, and kudos to Central Hudson for not doing this, but in Niagara Mohawk, they lost track, and the number of people they were tracking got lower and lower as the number of seniors and disabled got bigger and bigger in their areas. So we're gonna beat them up over that in the case. But one of the things that we're gonna tell them is they're gonna have to fix this. And in a normal rate case, it's just about money. It's not about social things. So, and I'll refer to another rate case. There was a rate case that was decided this year, but started last year. And it's the New York State Electric and Gas, NYSEG, which is partly in your area and all the way down to like Orange County and whatnot. The environmental groups were able to get the company to promise to fight climate change. And what they did is they agreed to a net zero increase in the growth of their gas plant and gas spending during the rate plan. That's the first time that's ever been done in the state of New York. That can't be done except through a settlement. And that's why settlements are 9.5 out of 10 cases are settled in New York, not litigated. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
I used to be a college professor, so I always ask, did I answer what you were asking, or did I go off on what I wanted to talk about instead?
That was a good question. Thanks, Margot.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great, Margot. Do we have any more folks who want to talk? I have half a cup of tea. I'm good for a while.
If anyone needs help unmuting or anything, I don't see anything coming in on the YouTube or Facebook or the spreadsheet. Nothing new.
Okay, let me do this then. Our statewide toll-free hotline number is 877-669-2572. If you are a low income or low fixed income or medically vulnerable, we will help you. If you're income eligible, we'll help you for free. If you're not income eligible, like if you're a fixed income but you have a little bit more, we'll still help you anyway. Fortunately, the legislature doesn't spank us if we do that because they want us to help people. You can also send to our main email, which is info, INFO, @utilityproject, which is all one word, .org. And we'll try and help everybody. Even if you have a lot of money, what we'll do is we'll tell you, we can't help you, but here's where you can find the law and go talk to these people. So we try never to say no to anybody, even if we can't give you free help, but we will help you if you call up, and especially if you're a vulnerable New Yorker. That's our job.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll make sure to share all of that widely. And now we have this recording of this really helpful presentation that I'm going to blast out to everyone who's reached out to us, Margot, Nadine, and the rest of the Landlord Tenant Relations Council for help these past few months, as well as our whole list of all the landlords, thanks to our rental registry law.
Cool. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention, by the way, is that in that same December 27 piece of legislation, there was something called the Emergency Renters Assistance and Utility Bill, which is, I forgot how much money. It's only like $2 billion or something. Only, I know it makes a big difference in our lives, but at the federal level, it's like $2 billion. I got some in my pocket. But it's money to pay for renters and for small landlords who are experiencing significant economic problems because of the moratorium on evictions. So for all the like 4-unit and under housing, which tends to be owner occupied, like those people are in really horrible shape because they haven't been able to collect rent in 10 months at this point. And so there's a lot of money in that to go to that kind of assistance across the United States. It also has some money in it to help pay down arrears. We don't have any idea how that money is going to be allocated or spent. There has to be more process by the state legislature and by groups like mine, like banging on the door of the state and the feds and saying, you have to tell us what we can do with this. But that money's out there for the Tenants Council to help also. And I'll make the observation that we work very closely with tenants groups around the state. We talk to landlord groups. I mean, they're not our clients, but we have no reason, to do anything other than say, you should probably talk to these people. We're not going to help you. But, if they just say, we heard about this law because Lori or Berkeley or someone was talking, like we'll say, yeah, go look at this. But there's still a lot of things out there and more in the President Biden's new legislation that he's talking about that hopefully will be passed any second now. And I don't know, we have more than $1.5 billion in unpaid rent in New York. We have $1.5 billion in unpaid electric and gas bills in New York. And I have no idea how much we have in internet, television, and water. Now, the Wall Street Journal said the entire unpaid water bills in the entire United States is only about $2 billion. I know that sounds like a lot of money, but when you figure 320 million people, so like 120 million households, it doesn't sound like that much money. So it might be more, but that's something that is solvable. And that's our next big steps. And like I said all along, we tell everybody, pay what you can afford to pay. The law protects you so that you only need to pay what you can afford, but you should pay that. And, among other things, the utility has to stay in business if you want to still have heat and power. But paying these arrears, this is a very unusual circumstance. I mean, at a national level, the bill for energy arrears, I think it was Forbes said is probably close to $300 or $400 billion. That sounds like too much, but it's the next thing that for advocates like my group that fight on behalf of ratepayers is to figure out how to pay that, because the utilities can't just wave it away. Just like you can't say cancel rent, like there are a lot of small owners who will get harmed. Immigrants who came to this country, saved up and bought a 2 or 3 unit. They live in it with their family. That's how they make their money, like they're living in their retirement. So we can't just wave all this stuff away. It has to be paid for somehow, but it also has to be paid for in a way that doesn't increase the amount that people can pay. So it can't become unaffordable for people to live where they've lived all their lives. You can't have stratified towns and villages and cities where only one class of people live, because that harms the social fabric. And you can't, if I owe you $1,000 and the average arrears now for New York homes that are behind on their bills is like $1,300, $1,400. That's a lot. If you had to pay that immediately, you'd have trouble paying for food, medicine, and whatnot. So no one wants to do that, but we have to figure out a way to pay these in a way that is equitable across all the stakeholders. So come back in 3 to 5 months and we'll have an answer on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a really useful add-on. Well, I guess like that's it. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. You guys are probably my favorite state resource. So I'm really happy we were able to make this work.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. If you want us to come back, or if you want us, I know that a lot of the mayors and town and county executives and not-for-profit groups do like town halls and roundtables and whatnot. We're happy to come to those. We do those in New York City all the time. It's even easier now that we just show up on Zoom, but we used to go down there and answer questions for people. And we do that around the entire state. I have an attorney out in Buffalo, and my Buffalo attorney covers the whole western part of the state. From Albany, we cover from Long Island all the way up to the Canadian border and across to the Finger Lakes. And we love it. It's a great job, honestly. I'm not hiring or anything, but it's a great job. Like, so you don't send me a resume. Love it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Yeah, once the college is like more in person again, there are a couple groups that I've been working with that wanted to do like a big in-person thing. So, once we get through all of this pandemic, I'll definitely be getting you guys to come in person to New Paltz. But until then, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I used to come there a lot under your previous 2 mayors.
Oh.
I knew Jason and Tom for a long time.
Oh, nice. Love it.
So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and don't hesitate to call us if you have a question.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
All right.
you.
Let me figure out how to stop this.